Good morning. I'm Janet Borchard, a senior biology and environmental studies major, and I'm excited to welcome you today to the biology colloquium presentation by Brian Dougherty, who is a student of soil and a consultant at Understanding Ag. Brian Dougherty attended Ellsworth Community College, where he received an associate's degree of applied sciences in farm management, and then returned home to Waukon to work as a partner on his family farm for 17 years before going back to school. He then received his BS in Ecological Engineering from Oregon State University in 2016 and a master's degree in Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering from Iowa State University in 2018. While at Iowa State, he was selected as a Nuffield Farming Scholar. After receiving his master's degree, Mr. Dougherty served as a field agricultural engineer for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach for 4 years, before switching to his current career of consulting for Understanding Ag earlier this year. Today, he will be giving a talk titled Changing the World with Biological Agriculture. We are so excited to have you here today. Please join me in welcoming Brian Dougherty to Nuffield College.
Great, appreciate the warm welcome. It's great to be here. I never turned down a chance to indoctrinate some young students before you get out into the world. So I see a few familiar faces, so some of you may have seen this before, but you'll have to hang in there with the rest of it. So I'll jump right into it here. So I want you all, just for a minute, to picture some soil. Could be from your garden, farm you grew up on, your favorite spot in the woods, whatever it is. Picture yourself holding a handful of that soil. What if I told you, in your hands, you hold the power to change your life, to change your community, and to change the world? Anybody believe me? A few people. We're going to talk about how. So when I think about soil, this is what I think about. This is our little slice of heaven just east of Waukon, Iowa, where I grew up on the family farm there. I'm here in the bio. I came back, took over the farm in a partnership with my brother. Did that for 17 years. And then one beautiful winter day, I came out to get the cows that are in the barn behind me in this picture, move them into the barn that's in front of me in this picture for the morning milking. And right then I had an epiphany. One of those light bulb moments when everything becomes clear. And what I realized was that you add up 8 feet of snow and $1 a gallon milk, you get a midlife crisis. So I said, the heck with that. I'm done with dealing with this snow. So I went on this long 10-year journey. You kind of heard about some of it already. Everybody thought I was off my rocker, but sold the cows, moved to Oregon, did an undergrad engineering degree there, did some biochar research, came back to Iowa State, focused on soil health and water quality, did the Nuffield scholarship in 2018, where I was able to travel internationally, meet with farmers all over the world that are working on regenerative agriculture. I'm not really going to get into that today, but I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards if you're interested. But needless to say, that program changed my life. I wouldn't be standing here today had I not done that. So I worked for Iowa State, went through a program with Nicole Masters. If you're in the soil health world, you may know that name. She's a consultant from New Zealand. And now I work for Understanding Ag. So we basically, our company works full-time, one-on-one with farmers, food companies, you name it, just trying to make regenerative agriculture a reality. So it's kind of gone full circle. But, strangely enough, it's actually an engineering school where I started learning about soil. Really became passionate about it and realized that soil is connected to everything. All these environmental issues that I was wanting to work on, they all come back to how we manage our soil. So what I want to do today, this talk's going to be a little bit different than your standard soil health talk. I'm actually going to start out talking about energy and water and the resources and all the other things that are related to agriculture that are going to seriously impact how we're going to have to farm in the future, and how we make this transition to a more regenerative food system and reconnect people with the land. So, to start out with, why can't we just keep doing what we're doing? Why do we need a new vision for agriculture? to answer that question, we have to step back and take more of a global look. So Jody's going to give extra credit points for anybody who can guess what this graph is. What's this a graph of? No, it's not soil erosion. Good guess though. Population growth. Extra credit points. Human population growth. That is an incredibly fast exponential growth curve. That could just as easily be resource use or energy use. In fact, if we look at energy use is growing even faster than population. So now our blue line here, this is population. The red line is energy. This only goes to the year 2000. We've already blown completely off the top of this graph. We're like up here. 19 terawatts of energy. That's how much we used in 2021. If you don't know what a terawatt is, in US units we call that a crap ton. It's a really big number. That's a lot of energy. Population growth, we're at about 8 billion right now. But if we look at long term, what we can do with renewable energy, sustainably without fossil fuels, which eventually we're gonna have to figure that out. Something like 5 to 10 terawatts, probably doable in the long term with some nuclear and some renewables. So we got an issue there. Okay, this one gets double extra credit if anybody can guess what this graph is. Any takers?
Farmers in the United States.
Are you cheating? You must have seen this before.
I talk to my mother a lot. Talks to her mother.
Number of farms from 1935 to 1997. That's what we call an exponential decay equation. That's going the opposite direction. And again, this could be a graph of schools, businesses, you name it. Our rural communities have really been shrinking. Now, I cut it off in 97 because USDA changed the way they report the numbers and how they count farmers and what screwed up my graph. We're still on the downward slide. It's starting to level off just because there's so few farmers left. We're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel now for what we have compared to what we had, back in the 30s. So, why am I talking about these two things? These are directly related to each other. These are not coincidences. And to understand why, basically the reason this is happening is because we've turned our modern society into a linear system. It's an input-output system. So think of civilization as a pipe. It's a one-way flow. And through that pipe, every year, we cram about 100 billion tons of raw materials, our 19 terawatts of energy, and out the other end, 43 billion tons of CO2 goes into the atmosphere. We've got a couple billion tons of stuff we truck in landfills every year. We've got dead zones from all of the nutrient runoff. We've got plastic in the ocean. Pretty soon we're gonna have more plastic in the ocean than we have fish. So we have some issues here with this linear system that we've created. And the challenging thing is these numbers are predicted to double by 2050. So think about that for a minute. We're already at 19, which is not sustainable. Where the heck are we gonna get 38 terawatts of energy? That's gonna be a major challenge. Let's look at agriculture, same deal. Every year, we take about 200 million tons of fertilizer, 4.2 million tons of pesticides, about 30% of global energy goes into growing and producing and transporting and consuming our food. Again, out the other end, about 9 billion of that 43 comes from agriculture. Throw in 75 billion tons of soil erosion every year. We've got pesticide buildup. It's in our food, it's in our water, it's in our bodies, it's everywhere. Most of those dead zones are due to agricultural activity. And these numbers also are predicted to increase by about 60% by 2050. So ask yourselves again, where are we going to get all that stuff? That's going to be a challenge. Basically, what we've done is we've turned our entire food system and how we feed people globally into an extraction industry. If you think about it, it's a linear system that's designed to take stuff from one end of the line and move it to the other end. So the wealth accumulation, along with all the nutrient pollution and everything that goes along with that, accumulates on the other end. We export soil, nutrients, people, it drives farms out of business, and it shrinks rural communities. And this is just not a U.S. phenomenon. When I was traveling internationally, everywhere I went, farmers are telling the same story. Can't afford land, kids can't afford to get into farming. You know, the whole system's just not working for the farmer. Because if you're a primary food producer, you're on the wrong end of the line. You're basically on the extraction end, you're not on the wealth accumulation end. So again, we got a problem here that we need to fix as well. But this is okay, right? Because everyone agrees that we have hands down the most efficient food production system in the history of the world in this country, right? Everybody who agrees with that statement? Man, you guys are a tough crowd. Who agrees? You haven't been drinking the Kool-Aid, I guess. So let's take a look at that efficiency. Pre-industrial era, you know, we're talking horsepower here, human muscle power. It took about a calorie of energy to produce 5 calories of food. Anybody guess what it is today? Are we doing better than that because we're so much more efficient? Is it better or worse? Worse? You're going the right direction. It takes 13.3 calories now to produce 1 calorie of food. The way we do that is with fossil fuels. We've substituted, you know, mechanical human energy for energy we get from fossil fuels. So if we look at efficiency that way, we're actually 66 times less efficient at converting energy to food than we were pre-industrial era. So again, how efficient is this really? We've got some challenges here. And in nature, got a bunch of biology students here, so you hopefully understand biology 101 concept. Any organism that requires more energy to find its food than it contains is going to die. So think about that. But it's okay, right? We got all these fossil fuels out there. They're going to last a long time. If you actually look at the numbers there, anybody want to guess how fast we're using these resources? How many years does it take to form the coal that we burn in 1 year? Any guesses? 1,000 years? 10,000? 100,000? See some heads shaking. 200,000 years. That's how much we burn every year. How about oil? Think it's more or less? More? 2.5 million. For natural gas, it's 3.4 million. So it takes 3.4 million years to form the amount of gas that we use in 1 year. So clearly, we can't keep doing this. If we look at oil in particular, this is probably going to be our biggest challenge because oil lubricates our entire global economy. We cannot function without it. Our economies will crash and burn. Unfortunately, we've used a lot of cheap, easy stuff. That's basically peaking. It doesn't mean we're running out, it just means we're reaching the point at which we can no longer extract it at the same rate because oil wells have a decline rate of about 6% a year. Every year we have to drill 6% more wells just to stand still. And it gets worse as you go down. Fracking, it's like 30%, 40% decline rate. As we move down the list here, this stuff gets more expensive, harder to get at, and we burn more and more of it just to get it out of the ground. So this is where we're headed. This process is irreversible. There is nothing we can do to stop this. We've used all the cheap, easy stuff. So expect in the very near future that energy is going to get a lot more expensive than it is today. We know our economy doesn't function very well when that happens. Let's look at materials. Same deal. There's this idea, and is there any economics professors in here? You're probably going to flunk me. No econ? Okay, well, I'm safe. So there's this idea that we're going to decouple our economy, we're going to keep growing our GDP, and we're not going to use any more energy or materials to do it. That's a fantasy. Almost 100% correlated. You double GDP, you're going to double energy use, you're going to double materials extraction. So if we grow at, what's considered sustainable 2 to 3% a year, that's what we've all been used to in our lifetimes. Everybody sitting in this room, that's what we think is normal. We do that, it doubles every 25 to 35 years. So if we just project that out for materials, those numbers start to get really big. Okay, a few people are still awake. You guys gotta laugh at my jokes. This journal is smartassery, they'll publish anything. So yeah, we can't keep doing this either. So the UN tells us that this 2.1% growth rate is sustainable. If you project that out to 2100, that's what it looks like. Does anybody think we can keep doing that? So we got a bunch of biologists here. Hopefully you understand the concept that other than sunlight coming in, we live in a closed system. Perpetual growth is not possible. We can't keep doing that. We can have a sustainable civilization, but it's not going to grow at 2% a year. Luckily, what happens in the year 2100? Anybody know? All of our problems are just going to magically go away, right? You ever seen a graph that goes beyond 2100? I've never seen one. Just, who cares? We don't have to worry about it. Some of you are probably way too young to remember Alfred E. Newman. What? Me worried? We'll just ignore it. Then there's the idea of the technology and innovation and efficiency. We're just going to innovate our way out of this. That's going to solve all of our problems. I don't think that's going to happen either. So if you think about technology, what is it? It's really just energy and materials. Name one single technology that doesn't use one or both of those things. Technology can help us kick the can down the road, but it doesn't solve our fundamental constraints. It's this thing called Jevons paradox. Some economists probably hate me for talking about this. But in general, the more efficient it is to make something, the more resources we end up using because it gets cheaper and we buy more of it. Pretty straightforward. You see that across all kinds of different products. Technology is an expression of what energy we can exploit. It doesn't solve our fundamental problem. It doesn't remove biophysical limits. And really what we have is a situation of ecological overshoot. People have been arguing about this for decades, but it's basically a collective action problem. We're using too much stuff, and there's a lot of us. And there's a lot of people that are improving their standard of living, and they have a right to use stuff like we did. So we've kind of got a pickle here, but there's really no technological fix to this. This is a collective action problem. It's more of a societal problem that we need to figure out. So wrap your head around this. At current rates of growth, we will need more oil, more energy, more materials in the next 30 years than we've used since the beginning of human civilization. Anybody think that's actually going to happen? There's a technological term for this, and that's called "ain't gonna happen." Now I know there's supposed to be a few English professors in here. You're gonna flunk me for this one. This is not gonna happen. So I'm sorry, young people. We blew your oil inheritance, and you're not getting it back. We went to the casino and spent it. So we got a problem with our linear systems here. Basically, we live in a circular world. Linear systems at some point will fail. Our economic system, our food system, our energy system are all linear. They temporarily, which is key word there, they've disconnected us from the ecosystems that support life. You biologists in here, you understand this. We need your systems to function. That's what's keeping us alive. Massive disruption of global nutrient, water cycles. We use our economic system to basically go into debt, claim more resources than we actually have. And we're kind of on a collision course right now. So the inevitable outcome of linear systems is ecosystem destruction and civilizational collapse. That sounds pretty harsh, but there's a whole lot of civilizations that came before us that probably thought they'd still be around, and they're not here. Why? They degraded their ecosystem. Unfortunately, now we're doing this on a global scale. There's 8 billion of us. So you guys, I'm sure you've all at some point been through an airport or you've been in a shopping mall. They have those little kiosks with the map on and the arrow that says you are here. You've all seen one of those? Well, you're right here. Sorry, we screwed up. Now for the bad news. No, I'm kidding. I'll go easy on it. We'll end on a positive note, I promise. So how do we fix this? How do we transition our linear systems to circular systems? That is the fundamental challenge of the 21st century. We need to figure out how to take that line and bend it around the circle, and we need to figure out how to do it without breaking, without shattering our economy and our human connections. That is the challenge for all of you in this room. What's that look like? What's agriculture look like in a circular world? Basically, everything needs to get recycled and reused. We need our CO2 going back into plants instead of going into the atmosphere. We need to fix our nitrogen with plants and with soil biology. Renewable energy, the whole 9 yards. Our food waste, we gotta quit throwing that in landfills. Recycle all of our human poo. Somewhere along the line, we decided it was a great idea to spend a whole bunch of energy to clean up our water from the rivers so we can drink it. And instead of drinking it, we just take a turd in it and flush it back into the river again. Great system we got there. You guys are supposed to laugh at that. We gotta fix that. We gotta get those nutrients back on the landscape. The great thing about a circular system is all those big numbers I talked about earlier, they don't matter. If you have a circular system, everything just keeps going around. Now, 100% recycling rate is impossible. We're never gonna have that, but we can do a whole lot better than what we're doing now. So we need to close all of these loops. So that brings us to regenerative agriculture, which is the main focus today. What is it? You probably all heard this term if you've read articles about it. The way I see it, what regenerative agriculture is it's a local solution to our global problem. It uses biological principles to reconnect our broken nutrient and water cycles. So if you look at the Latin root of biology, it's the logic of life. But it goes beyond that, because regenerative agriculture is about more than just what happens on the farm. It's about how does that farm affect the wider community and society at large. So it also uses social principles to reconnect people to where their food comes from, and to their local communities. So the way we fix this is by working together, using the logic of life to completely transform how we farm and how our farms interact with their communities. And I know I've been all doom and gloom here, but I can't stress enough that this is an incredible opportunity, especially for you young people in the room, to get involved in agriculture. Because this all comes back to the soil, and even if energy gets expensive and scarce, we still have to eat, we still need clean water. That energy will go to agriculture before other sectors. And healthy soil is the foundation of all of this. That's what's going to make regenerative agriculture work. It's the foundation of healthy soil, resilient farms, healthy communities, and ultimately a livable planet. So we have a choice to make. Each and every one of us, as individuals, as communities, as a society, which way are we going to push the system? We can push it in a degenerative direction and we can break it, or we can push it in a regenerative direction and we can learn how to bend without breaking. So if we look at the farm scale, it really comes down to management. How do we manage our soil? And we decide how we manage our soil. We choose the path, so you can start with bare soil, nothing growing, lose your organic matter, your nutrients, break your water cycle, the whole system doesn't function, and then you have to fix it, spend a bunch of money on fertility, chemicals, pesticides, engineering fixes. And then we start over, do the same thing again the next year, and we drive that system in a degenerative direction. This is what I call the death cycle, a deteriorating farm. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can flip that entire thing on its head, go the other direction, start with plant diversity, cover the soil, stop the erosion, stop the nutrient loss, fix the water cycle. Now we spend less money fixing the broken system. This is a life cycle of a farm that's regenerating and getting better over time rather than worse. Bottom line, we're not going to engineer our way out of this. This is a biological problem and it has a biological solution. Soil is the battery of life. and we need to recharge the battery. We've been draining it for several thousand years now. And this sounds like a weird analogy, but if you look at how soil functions, it literally works just like a battery. Your plants are solar panels, they're capturing energy, they're pumping carbon into the soil. With electrons, it's literally charging up the soil. So our stable carbon, you hear a lot about carbon sequestration. That's basically how big is your battery. And then the carbon that cycles through the system, that's how charged up is it. It's pretty simple when you think about it. This is how soil works. Without getting into all the redox chemistry and stuff that hopefully you'll study at some point, if you haven't already. Soil is also the engine of life. We need to rebuild the engine. It's worn out. We need to fix it. And soil aggregation, little clumps of soil that make the whole thing function, they're the engine of a soil that's healthy and functions properly. And it's the soil microbiome, or the soil food web, that basically assembles that engine, puts the fuel in it so it can go down the road. Soil biology. It's the communication system for the soil, it's the transportation system, it's the digestive system for plants, it's the immune system for plants. This is how a soil is meant to work. Ultimately, it takes death and turns it into life, and it is the only thing in the world that can do that. Kind of like magic in a way. So, if you've never seen healthy soil, that's what it looks like. That's what we want. That is a healthy, well-aggregated soil. So some of you are of the age, you remember the old war on drugs commercials in the 80s. You know, this is your brain on drugs. This is your soil, and that's your soil on drugs. This is what we've done to it over several centuries now. The good news is we can fix it. We can get that to look like that. Just take some time and some management. Soil is also the web of life, and we need to reweave it. The web of life is coming unraveled on us. You're probably hearing a lot about microbiomes now, the human gut microbiome. The soil microbiome and the human gut microbiome are intricately linked. They function very much the same. There's a direct connection between soil health, plant health, animal health, and human health. This stuff is all connected. What we do to the soil, we do to ourselves. We are seeing incredible dysfunction in our gut microbiomes right now. And a lot of it has to do with how we grow our food and what we eat, how we process it. Soil is also the sponge of life. I want to spend a little time on this one. We need to rehydrate the sponge. So you all know about the large water cycle. Water evaporates off the oceans, goes over land, it rains back down. Not a whole lot we can do about that. That's a big global cycle. You know, there's issues there with the ocean getting warmer and that, but what we need to focus on is a small water cycle that happens over land, because we, with our management of land, directly influence that small water cycle. And we can fix it. A lot of the craziness with weather that we're seeing right now is because we have broken the small water cycle. So go back 10,000 years, there was something like 8 billion hectares of forest on the earth and about 5 billion of grassland. Look at today, we're down to 4 billion of forests, 3.5-ish of grasslands, just under 2 of cropland that we've converted, and we now have 3.6 billion hectares of desert that was not there 10,000 years ago. That is not natural. We did that through poor land management, through poor animal grazing, through poor farming practices. A majority of this land, a lot of this grassland now is degraded as well, but we know how to fix it. I took this picture this spring in Kansas. That is a cornfield, believe it or not. That's what we've done to our soil. That used to be a fertile grassland ecosystem, and now it looks like that. We can bring it back. We know how to do it. We just have to get to work and get it done. So we've broken the water cycle. This is what many of our farms look like around the world, not just the US, for a majority of the year. We got bare soil, nothing growing. Rain comes down, surface seals off, compacts, or water doesn't infiltrate. It runs off, creates all kinds of issues. It evaporates. That's a broken system. But we can fix it. grow plants. It's pretty simple. Keep the soil covered with a living root. Keep residue armor on the surface. When it rains, that water hits. It doesn't impact the soil. It infiltrates. We've got roots going in the ground. We get our water in the soil deeper. Good aggregation, good infiltration. A healthy soil will do that. That is a functioning water cycle. And we know how to do this. We can restore the water cycles on our crop ground and on all of our grazing lands. And that will make an incredible difference. Because you hear a lot about climate change, but if you study hydrology and physics, you'll learn that 95% of the heat dynamics on the planet are actually governed by water, not CO2. CO2 is about 4%. Not saying we don't have a problem with CO2, we got a big problem. But the water cycle is the dominant driver. And soil aggregation is absolutely critical to have a functioning water cycle. Biology, through the glues and root exudates that it produces, are what build aggregates. We have to get the biology back in our soils. Biology also is what drives the water cycle over land, for the most part. A lot of research on this now. It's actually microbes given off by plants and volatile organic compounds that serve as the raindrop nuclei for the majority of raindrop formation over land in this small water cycle. When you get rid of all the vegetation, you break the water cycle, you turn it into a desert. Poor land management is what's creating the majority of the wet, dry extremes that we see right now. CO2 is just adding salt to the wound. So that's our other energy problem. Basic physics here. You probably studied this. You know, we got 342 watts per square meter of energy coming in. We got 339 going out. Greenhouse effect, CO2, water vapor. Pretty straightforward. But what isn't often talked about is that CO2 is actually only a part of the picture. I mentioned that. We got to pay attention to water vapor and the water cycle and what's happening with our soil. If you look at cumulative emissions, actually about a third of it came out of the soil. It came from land use change that's now up in the atmosphere. We can put a lot of that back. It's going to take time, but we know how to do it. So this is some work by Walter Yenny and some other scientists that have looked at this. If you don't know who Walter Yenny is, Google it and watch his videos. He has this concept called the soil carbon sponge. In a nutshell, if we revegetate 5% of Earth's land area, we can fix our 3-watt problem. Just by the power of plant transpiration, because it provides a cooling effect. Now it gets way more complicated than that, because there's about 10 different positive and negative feedbacks with the water cycle, but in a nutshell, that'll get the job done. Now we still got to fix our CO2 emissions problem, because that's just going to keep making it worse. But we can at least get back in balance. Now if you try to do all of that on ag land, we'd have to up transpiration by like 23%, which probably isn't realistic, so we're going to have to, you know, that big old brown blob right there that human activity created, we need to turn that green, and we know how to do it. There's projects all over the world that have proven that you can revegetate and regreen deserts. We just got to get to work and get it done. This just illustrates it. I took this picture last year with a thermal imaging camera. The power of plant transpiration. 2 feet away. That vegetation is 68 degrees. That soil is 103, 10 o'clock in the morning. I regularly clock soil temperatures at 130 to 140 degrees. Simple physics here. Stefan-Boltzmann equation for black body radiation. It's temperature to the 4th power. The hotter that gets, it re-radiates exponentially more heat back into the atmosphere. All we gotta do is cover the surface, green plants, and we can stop a lot of that heating. So if you care about climate, whether you're young or old or in between, focus on growing plants, fix the soil, fix the water cycle. If you want to make a difference in the world, it's right here. Not saying don't work on CO2 emissions, we need to do that, but if you really want to make a difference and make the world a better place, do it with soil and plants and biology. That's how we fix our problem. Because the earth is a circular system that's meant to work together, that connects the soil, the plants, the animals, the humans, to the broader ecosystem. A lot of our problem is because we try to separate ourselves out from this, and through our management, we've also broken every single one of these links that connect everything together and make our ecosystems function. So we have to fix these. How do we do it? So how do we reconnect our soil, our plant links? This is a year-long college course on one slide. I don't have time to get into how you actually go about all the details of doing this today. But in a nutshell, follow what we call the soil health principles. Basically, keep the ground covered with a living plant, minimize your disturbance, add diversity, integrate livestock. You can read about that online if you're not familiar with it. Figure out what's limiting productivity and maximize photosynthesis. Again, we got to pump our water through our plants and get those plants to capture all of our CO2, and that will go a long ways towards fixing our problem. So, learn about soil. That's the take home there. Connecting our plant-animal links. That's all about growing healthier plants, to feed healthier animals, make healthier food for us. We put a lot of our animals in confinement. That works great when energy's cheap, but energy is not going to be cheap forever. So as energy gets more expensive, you're going to start to see where some of these confinement operations, even just from an economic standpoint, aren't going to make a lot of sense in the future. So we're going to have to get animals back out on the landscape, because that cow right there takes zero energy to do what she's doing. She harvests her own feed, she spreads her own manure. You just gotta let her do it. That is an efficient system. And where we can't do that, we need to get much better at redistributing our nutrients, because we have like hot spots of livestock right now. We need to get those nutrients back out across the landscape so we can close our nutrient cycle, so we don't have to dig stuff out of mines and ship it halfway across the world to fertilize our fields. Because again, think about energy, think about materials. We can't keep doing that forever. Reconnecting our animal and human links. Again, this is about raising healthy products for your local community. We all have an obligation, a responsibility to seek out and buy food from local regenerative producers. And we're going to have to build back a lot of local and regional processing capacity. We had a huge wake-up call with COVID when some of the big packing plants shut down. We realized, we have a very fragile food system right now, and this whole thing can collapse quicker than we realize. So that's going to take a lot of effort. Invest in local food systems. We're going to think about energy, expensive energy. It's going to be awfully hard to ship, 1,500 miles the average food travels now before it gets to your plate. That's going to get dicey in the future. We need more local capacity just from reduction of energy. Remember, it was 13.3 calories of energy, 8 of it is in the transportation and the processing and the packaging and all that to get it on your plate. Connecting human and soil links. We got to get all this stuff out of landfills. You can't keep throwing everything away and making stuff that doesn't biodegrade. Easier said than done. There's people working on it, but we need to do a lot better. Again, our human poo, all of our food waste needs to get composted and returned to the local farms in the community, so you don't have to buy in fertilizer from 2,000 miles away. And just in general, a lot of people are just very disconnected from where their food comes from and how soil works. We need to encourage more people to grow their own food, put in a little garden, buy a flower in a pot. Anything is a good start. Just reconnect with nature and how things actually work. And then our wider ecosystem links. Our farms of the future are going to need to look a lot more like these than what we have now. Again, it's all about covering the soil, getting the plants to transpire water instead of letting it evaporate, and having bare soil that heats the surface. We need to buffer against climate extremes. We need plants and biology. It's the only way to do it. Distributed water catchment, large-scale restoration projects. These are happening all over the world. People are regreening the desert. We know how to do this. So this is where we need to get to. And if we do that, we can start to reconnect every single one of these links that we've broken over the last 10,000 years now, since we've started basically practicing agriculture. This isn't just a recent thing, but we can fix this. We know how to do it. So, what does the changed world look like with biological agriculture? That looks like healthy, well-aggregated soil on every farm, functioning soil-plant connections. We need to get our nitrogen biologically rather than the Haber-Bosch process. Again, incredibly energy intensive. It's going to get dicey in the future. Nitrogen is going to get very expensive to buy. We need to charge that soil battery with plants, because that's how the system's intended to work. We need to manage our livestock to maximize ecosystem health through managed grazing rather than just managing them to get the maximum rate of gain, which is the way most of it's done right now. Renewable energy, I really didn't get into that, but there's things we can do to generate that more locally and use it locally. Nutrients is a huge one. We've got to fix our global nutrient cycle. We've got to stop all the nitrogen from ending up in the Gulf of Mexico and the phosphorus and shipping food all over the world. This is not going to be a tenable system in the future. We need to keep our nutrients recycled locally. We need to integrate our farms with their local communities. There's a lot of great examples of that happening now, especially here in Decorah. So you got a great testing ground here for some of these ideas. Most importantly, we just need to reconnect farms with their local communities and realize that people are part of nature or not separate from it. This idea that we are separate from nature and we are above nature is what's gotten us into the pickle that we're in right now. So, all of you young people, old people, everybody in between, you can do this. We know how to do it. Learn about soil, grow plants, and learn to think in systems. Look at the big picture. A lot of our issues in agriculture and many other industries right now are because we've gotten a little bit too reductionist, and I know scientists hate when we say that, but we focus on little things and study the tree microscopically, and we can't see the forest. And the forest is what's going to save us. Got to look at the big picture and how all these systems interact. And we together can all do this. And we know how to do it. We just need the human will to make it happen. Because we have this, we call it a polycrisis, essentially, which is a bunch of smaller crises that all tie together and feed into this food, water, energy nexus. It's going to be a huge problem in the future. And healthy soil is how we solve it. So if you care about human health, you need to care about soil. If you care about community health, you need to care about soil. If you care about ecosystem health, you need to care about soil. And if you care about the health of the planet and our future ability to live on it, you need to care about soil. So, you hold the future in your hands when you hold that soil. Use the power of biology to change it. Thanks for your time. Questions, comments, criticisms? Yes.
So as a college student, I don't really have money or land. So how can I realistically help the soil?
Great question. College student, no money, no land, how can you help the soil? Work for a farmer. Find a local farmer who's doing this. Help them out. You know, you don't have a lot of money, and I realize a lot of this food that's being produced regeneratively right now is more expensive. What I would encourage you mainly right now is just study ecosystems. You know, I'm assuming most of your biology students are already doing this. I mean, your skill sets are going to be invaluable in the future. So just keep learning about this. Learn about how soil actually functions. A lot of our education right now, again, I'm going to make some people mad if they're watching this, but we don't really teach farmers and agronomists how soil actually functions. We need to learn how the whole system works together if we're going to be able to regenerate and cut some of our inputs. So just study it, again, learn to think in systems. I don't know, that's probably not a very satisfying answer. Question?
I have a potential idea answer. When I was in college, I would volunteer and do like a food trade we have an amazing local organic farm and CSA option here, but instead of buying it, you can offer a barter or a trade for your labor. And if you don't like doing farming, you can probably watch their kids or do something.
Yep.
So when I was poor, that helped.
Yeah, there's thousands of ways to get involved in agriculture without actually being a person out there working the soil. There's other ways you can help. Work for food companies. Where do they get their food? How do they source it? Who are they buying it from? Encourage them to buy the producers that are doing this. Way in the back there.
I would also add on to that, also as informs this, as you go forward with pressures, you the future leaders, your voters, start to try to improve policy at local, regional level.
Yeah, great point. There's a lot we could do policy-wise that would make this a lot easier.
First, I just want to praise the general point of this. This is fabulous. There is a human poo. Europe's starting to have some problems because they do recycle it, and there's an aggregation of heavy metals now.
Yep.
Food supply. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, great question. So on the human poo recycling, unfortunately, a lot of the stuff we eat isn't great. We take a lot of hormones and antibiotics and all this stuff that ends up in our food. So that's a challenge. Composting will break some of that down. But yeah, I guess I don't have a great answer for that other than we need to eat healthier. And again, that ties right into soil health. If we have healthier food, more nutrient-dense food, it's a direct connection to how we manage our soil. Everybody's gonna eat healthier. We're gonna spend a whole lot less time at the doctor. It's gonna fix a lot of our issues with expensive medical system that we have. We won't have to take as many antibiotics and stuff like that, and that will help with the quality issue, I guess you'd say, with human food. Composting helps. Yeah, it's something you'd certainly have to monitor and just make sure that you're distributing it evenly enough where you don't end up with a problem on a given field. Yeah, great point. That's the reason we don't do more of it right now is that issue. The stuff bioaccumulates at the sewage treatment plant. Yeah, question?
So I know like a really good solution to this is organic farming. But I know like the issue with organic farming is that it doesn't produce as much as people would like. Is there any other like regenerative farming techniques other than organic farming, like stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. What else can we do besides organic? And we were just having this conversation. The challenge with organic is weed control. You have to do more tillage. And tillage isn't necessarily any better than having to use chemicals. That's a tough one. People are working on, there are people that are kind of cracking the nut, I guess you'd say, on no-till organic. So that's part of it. I mean, the yields are going to be lower, but again, if you look at the nutrient density in that food, we don't necessarily need the yields. If you look at how much food waste we have, if we can solve some of that, we've had such an intense focus for decades on yield, but we don't look at the quality of what we're producing. There's plenty of food out there. It's a distribution problem, it's a quality problem, and it's a food waste problem. If we can work on those things, we can farm more regeneratively, even on the same amount of land that we're using now. And then who's to say we can't use more land to actually grow food instead of producing ethanol or something like that? I'm not even gonna go there, I'll really make people mad. Suffice it to say that we choose how we use our land. We don't have to grow corn ethanol, we don't have to turn it, we can do whatever we want with it. There's plenty of land to do this and feed everybody and do it in a healthy way. Question?
You're kind of preaching to the choir here, so I'm wondering, how do you get this message up to other organizations like Farm Bureau or Corn Growers Association,
Now you're really gonna get me in trouble. No, good question. How do you get the message out? Nobody threw anything at me, so I must be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but yeah, it's a great question. We're working on it. A lot of what we do with understanding ag is just education. We hold workshops, field days, whatever you gotta do to try to get people to look at this, and there's, I would say the interest is astronomical right now. COVID was one wake-up call, and then high energy, high fertilizer prices was another one. And all of a sudden, everybody's wanting to know, maybe this cover crop thing is a good idea, I need to look into this, I wanna reduce my input costs. So I think the message is spreading. The commodity organizations, they're doing some good work. You know, there's people getting involved, they're asking questions, and they're learning. It's really just, it's an education thing. Personally, that's where I think we need to focus. I mean, if we could get government policy to change, that would be massive, but I'm not holding out any great hope for that necessarily, but, it's happening, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. It's not happening as fast as we'd like, but you actually don't, when you look at tipping points, we can get 15% of farmers doing this, it'll just snowball and it'll happen pretty quickly. And we're getting close. Question?
Connected to my question about, so the farm bill expires the end of this month, right? And I think there's a lot of work being done on it, but I've heard in seminars and locally, like, farmers will follow the incentives in the farm bill, like it's the system.
Yep.
And so that system, if you had a wish list, for how to modify that system so that it incentivizes this sort of stuff, what would you have on that list?
Okay, yeah, so the question, if you didn't hear, basically, Farm Bill is coming up for renewal. What would I do to fix it or incentivize this kind of production? Good question. And this would be very controversial, but one thing I would do is start to phase out some of the crop insurance premium support, because crop insurance very much distorts what we grow, how we grow it, where we grow it. I mean, it puts a floor, it takes away the risk, essentially. That picture I showed of what looked like the Sahara Desert in Kansas, the reason they're growing corn on that, I guarantee you, is because of crop insurance. If they didn't have crop insurance, they would not be doing that. They'd be farming that differently. So that's a big one. And I know that gets controversial because farming is risky and you can't just pull the plug on people and let everybody go bankrupt. So, it would have to be a gradual thing, but a lot of people will say they could change one thing and get rid of crop insurance. So that's one. Just general support for payments for other programs. I would, there's, right now it's kind of a focus on like corn, beans, wheat, rice, cotton, kind of the big five. We need to level the playing field, let people grow whatever they want and be supported doing it. And then I would just have more money going into general conservation work and ecosystem services, measuring outcomes, and pay people for that, rather than just growing corn and beans and commodity crops. So those would be the big ones I would work on.
And the taxpayer does about 60% of the farm insurance, is that right?
Yeah, I think I don't know the exact number, it's 50 or 60%, Ross, I don't know what, but yeah, it's not free for farmers, but it's subsidized. If they had to pay the full cost of it, that would change what they do and how they do it. Yeah, question?
As a farmer in Winnebago County that practices regenerative practices, one of the biggest challenges is that of others that are doing it is that they're constantly being bombarded by companies to get used products, whether it's tillage equipment, fungicides, pesticides, whatever it is, because they're going to get a return on investment. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that and you mentioned it earlier, is that there is a snowball effect that it's changing. Some of the large, like ADM, for example, is coming out with some programs on regenerative practices, whereas before it was all short-term ROI was their goal for their investors. And everyone in here probably has a 401k, and your 401k is invested in a lot of these companies, and you want a return on your investments. So that whole cycle works against some of what we're trying to get done. And so I think we're heading in the right direction, but it's it's also a fact that you wanna do something with your 401k that may get less when you invest in ADM or John Deere or whatever it may be, that they're out there wanting to make a buck too, and that's, you're constantly bombarded with that. So you're sort of a black sheep in a way to start doing this, but you have to hold the line against that pressure.
Yeah, great comment. Let's kind of paraphrase for people online that maybe couldn't hear that or watch this later. Generally, we're kind of trapped in this system. You know, our 401ks, I'm guilty as charged. I'm not standing up here trying to be preachy and say I'm any better than anybody else. You know, I'm part of the system too. But we have this whole economic system that's geared towards quick return on investment, getting farmers to buy stuff and thinking about the short-term ROI. How do we change that? Yeah, that's a tough system. It's slowly changing, but our current economic system is a lot of what drives what we do and why we do it and all that. So we need to, I think it's gonna have to come from consumers, bottom up, that ask or demand for these products to be raised a different way. I mean, that's what's gonna have to drive it. Like I said, I don't have a lot of faith that government policy is gonna drive it from the top down. And you know, there's a whole industry geared towards maintaining the status quo and doing what we do now. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. A lot of fantastic, wonderful people work in that industry. Not trying to bash what anybody's doing, but we gotta look at the longer term consequences of how we're farming. Figure out how to turn that around so we can, you know, be in this for the long haul.
I know this is very speculative, but if you could do like a now and later. Iowa right now talks about for energy and fighting climate change as ethanol and wind power is what we're contributing. If instead we focused on regenerative agriculture and no-till, how would we look as sort of climate change heroes in comparison?
Yeah, so how would we compare regenerative farming to, you know, renewable energy? And, you know, I'm assuming you're talking about like carbon sequestration and things like that. Yeah, good question. Putting carbon in soil is hard. It takes time. I think people are getting a little bit putting the cart in front of the horse on some of that as far as being a solution to climate change. And I think it can definitely help. My main focus is fix the water cycle, get carbon in the cycle to make the system work, and then it will naturally increase in organic matter. How that would balance out as far as total emissions, you know, doing renewable versus soil practices, I don't really know. Good question. You know, there's lots of different efforts happening right now. I was talking about putting CO2 pipelines in to pump it underground from the ethanol plants. I'm not even gonna go there. But yeah, I don't have a great answer for that, but I think we're gonna need renewable energy. Because eventually oil is gonna get very expensive. But there's not gonna be enough to go around. Personally, this is gonna sound kind of crazy, but we need a whole lot more nuclear energy than what we're doing now. If you look at the actual data, it's one of the safest, cleanest energy sources that humans have ever come up with. Coal kills more people every day than have ever died from nuclear power. Throw in Chernobyl and Fukushima, I don't care, it's still way safer. And it's carbon-free, essentially, energy. So in the future, we need a lot more nuclear, along with the wind. You know, the nuclear provides base power, and then you have wind and solar and hydro and geothermal. There's some deep geothermal technologies that could make relatively renewable energy for thousands of years. So I don't worry about the energy side as far as electricity. Our big problem is oil. You know, it's got so much energy density, we don't have a good way to replace it. So looking at emissions and how we're gonna power our society in the future, oil is the tough nut to crack. I don't know how we're gonna do it, other than just we're gonna have to figure out how to do with less. I kind of wandered off topic there, but I like to pontificate. There's a question over here.
Yeah, you mentioned that moving to a regenerative system, we can't necessarily just engineer our way out of it. But I'm curious what technological advances could help us move towards that sort of model.
Okay, what technological advances could help us move towards regenerative ag? Good question. There's some exciting stuff coming out with soil testing, like on the biology side that could help us kind of understand what's happening underground so we can manage it better. That would be one. The other one, where we really need technology to save our butts, is weed control. We can grow healthy plants with healthy soil. We can get rid of our fungicides and insecticides. That's relatively speaking much easier to do than to control weeds. Because weeds right now, we have two options. You can till the soil, or you can use herbicides. And there's things you can do with cover crops, crop rotation, and that to help. But weed control is a huge issue. There's some new technologies coming along. One for organic herbicides that could really help. And two, the one that really excites me is there's a company working on this UV light technology. It essentially just cooks the weeds in the field. It shouldn't really hurt the biology. It's just, you mount it on a tractor, pull it through the field, and it'll basically terminate a cover crop or terminate your weeds. No chemicals, no tillage. Don't even have to touch the soil. There's this thing called a weed erase. You can already buy these for your garden. They got to scale it up so that it works at the farm level. There's another company in Kansas working on robotics. It's basically a self-powered lawnmower. They just get a whole swarm of them and run through the field and just mow the weeds down in between the crop rows. Greenfield, there's a couple different companies working on that. I'm a little more skeptical on the robotics side, just again because it's going to take batteries and materials and stuff that are, we're going to have heavy metal scarcity in the future, so that's a little iffy. But the UV light thing for deactivating weed seeds and terminating weeds, I think, would be just a massive game changer. We could get rid of herbicides. That's kind of the holy grail. Do it without tilling the soil. Yeah, great question.
Folks, can we thank our speaker?
I got my contact info there, if anybody wants to reach out.